hey, is this an issue of Wildcats or is this an issue of like Star Wars or something? Like, we got a hot girl in like black leather holding a lightsaber. What the fuck are we reading? Been enjoying going through the Wildcats book since issue 1. And, I went through all of them. And I've talked about how, starting with issue 15, Jim Lee left as an artist, and the writer that they had, Brandon Choi, they left, and they brought on James Robinson and Travis Charest. And I've talked about how the book suddenly got interesting. I'm not saying perfect, but it got more interesting because you have an actual writer with James Robinson, and he's crafting a story with kind of the understanding of an actual writer. I was going to say no disrespect meant, but I've made no bones about my dislike of Brandon Choi's writing. The man is not a writer. He can write words, sure, but he's never written anything worth a piss that anyone remembers. Like, you remember that great story that Brandon Choi wrote? He just wrote a lot of words and a lot of books, but they're all cliche, boring nonsense. It's just not worth it. So again, I'm only just talking about the work. I'm not talking about the human being. I don't know anything about him except that he wrote comics for Wildstorm that sucked. But you got James Robinson, and he looks at all this random stuff that was set up with these characters, and he's like, well, let's see what we can do with them. And, there was a whole conspiracy of this, the team of the Black Razors, the government soldiers that had to go take on the Wildcats, and we find out that one of the members of the Wildcats was actually a traitor. Like, not a traitor, but somebody had replaced one of the team members with an imposter, is what I'm trying to say. Not a traitor, but one of them was an imposter. And so we had to figure that out. We found out that Maul was an imposter, and they ended up uncovering the mystery, finding the real Maul. But amidst all of that, when the story first started, Voodoo got shot with like a round from like an attack helicopter. Somehow she took a few rounds from an attack helicopter and didn't blow giant holes through her. She just dropped to the ground unconscious, barely alive. And she was out of the story for the entire time because she was in recovery while, the Wildcats went and solved all the mystery of the imposter and this, that, the other. So now we have two things going on in the story. We have Voodoo, she's unconscious, and so the team is going to try and get her back on her feet. At the same time, we've got the mystery of why the alien lizard Damonites were trying to pull off an imposter scheme, why all of that was going on. So basically, the basic gist of this comic, the main thrust of it, is to get Voodoo back on her feet. So what they've got is this giant machine, and you've got Void in a seat next to her. They're basically going to link Void's mind to Voodoo to go into her unconscious because she's in a coma, Voodoo is, and try and get her out of it, get her back on her feet. And so it's basically a comic to get into the character of Voodoo. And like, at this point, what do we know about the character? What do we know anything about her that we care about, really? Like, nothing. She was a stripper, and she's like the Wildcats. She's half alien. So she's got these abilities that are part of her genetic structure, like Warblade and Maul. And so she's got these special abilities. That's why she's on the Wildcats team. But her ass is unconscious, and they need to fix her. So they're getting hooked up, and they're like, well, are you ready? And they're like, well, I guess the question is Void ready? And Void's like, as ready as I'll ever be. And so Jacob Marlowe, he's like, well, let's get going. We got to be ready and able when the word comes. Well, what word? Well, you cut to Grifter, and he's off like murdering the hell out of all kinds of bad guys, trying to get information about the bad guys that are trying to screw with the Wildcats. It's honestly not super important, the Grifter story. Honestly, I mean, I am sitting here talking about how James Robinson is writing a story that's more interesting than anything that happened in previous issues. It's true, but the story in this is not that interesting, honestly. The story of Grifter trying to track down information, so he's murdering a bunch of bad guys until somebody spills the beans on what's going on. And by the end of it, he's going to get the information they want to lead him into the next issue. So Grifter is just, it's also an issue full of a lot of splash pages. I talked about this last time, whether or not it was Travis Charest not wanting to do sequential pages, or he's not fast enough to do sequential pages, or maybe it's what James Robinson is giving him. Who knows what the reason is, but there's not a lot of panel work. But when it's Travis Charest, and I've talked about also, Charest, he was just advancing with every issue. Like, this is 4 issues in, and the difference from this book and the first book that he did, it's very, there's a big advancement in his skill. It's pretty shocking in my mind. He just got better page by page, book by book. He became a superstar in all of our eyes, and we were all watching it in real time like, look at this guy go. So my point being is, normally an all splash page book can be seen as a cheap-ass cop-out way to get through a book, but when you draw it really good, some of us tend to be really forgiving of it, myself included. Anyway, Grifter's trying to get information out of these bad guys, whatever, but then Void, she kind of transmutes herself into energy, and she enters the mind of Voodoo. Now, this gets into a thing where I normally complain about pages being filled with text boxes everywhere. But these are the inner thoughts of Void. So this is where there's a little bit of a difference in my kind of like my dislike of text boxes everywhere. It's one thing if they're text boxes of no one in particular in the story. It's not their point of view. It's just like the author writing words to talk to you, the reader. And you better be really good. Excuse me. Holy shit. You better be really good if you're going to have text boxes everywhere. There are no one character's particular point of view. But that's what this is. This is Void's thoughts as she is thinking about what she's seeing. And so that makes it more interesting for me. So that makes it better. And then if you can write an interesting point of view, yeah, I'm kind of on board with it. So it basically is Void trying to understand these visual representations of Voodoo's inner thoughts and feelings and, you know, just her mind. How do you get a visual representation of it? I always saw this shot and like, because, you know, Voodoo was a stripper when we met her in the comics. Is this supposed to be Nancy from Sin City? I mean, why not? Like, blonde girl, cowboy hat, guns on her hips. Like, that's totally Nancy from Sin City. Which, why not? Why not throw that in there? But, yeah, Void's saying that she's entering these different chambers of Voodoo's mind. And as she gets deeper, she goes into this one where it's Voodoo herself with a laser sword. So basically she's a Jedi with a lightsaber. And she's got Spartan, and he's fighting with her. They're back to back, but they're fighting monstrous versions of the Wildcats. So Void can't help but wonder, is this what Voodoo thinks of us? Are we all monsters to her? And she, in her subconscious, she always has to fight us. And there's been a hint of a romantic relationship between Voodoo and Spartan. And Spartan's a freaking robot. But Void's kind of picking up that Spartan looks not his normal self. He even looks kind of almost monstrous himself, but he's fighting with her. So she's fighting, you know, versions of the Wildcats. And in this, you know, mental battle that Void is witnessing, she has to jump in and help because the monster version of Void herself is going to sneak up and get Voodoo, and the real version of Void interrupts and attacks and fights and joins the battle. Then they move on in through her mindscape into a different chamber where now you got Voodoo and Spartan fighting familiar enemies, the Daemonites, these lizard creatures. And again, these are all splash pages, and they're all pretty well drawn. I really like the architecture, how it's darker up front, and then it gets lighter in the background. The creatures get lighter rendered, and they're darker up front. Gives you a sense of, you know, depth and scale. It's kind of a combination of like minimalistic artwork combined with very detailed artwork. It's a weird kind of combination of things going on that Charest does here. You know, I don't know if these, like I was saying, are these splash pages just because Charest is not good with speed on sequential pages, and so they just give him splash pages to get it done? Or is this something that James Robinson, you know, he constructed the story this way because that's what he wants? I don't know. But like I said, Travis's art makes it look good. But you kind of want like more panels on the page. And then so we're back with Grifter, and he's still just beating up more bad guys, just digging up information, shooting them, dragging them through the water, hanging them off the edge of a building. Great motorcycle. His perspective on the gun, like Charest's ability to technological stuff, like these gears and stuff, really, really good. And the colorist, I think I know who it is, but I don't want to, it doesn't even say. Colors, Joe Chiodo, with color assist, Martin Jimenez. So, I feel like the coloring in these books looks amazing. But yeah, these gears and these technological things going on up here, Charest is really good at that. But yeah, Grifter's still running around, murdering the shit out of bad guys, trying to get answers, while we're back inside Voodoo's head. Void's trying to understand what she's saying, and lots of text boxes. But basically, in her subconscious, they talk about the ancestors of the alien race that came to Earth, and they ended up creating genetic hybrids with humans, trying to reproduce, and eventually it worked, and it created this one being who is the ultimate ancestor of Voodoo. And it's like the genetic knowledge that's contained in his body is passed down through the ages, and it manifests its peak form in Voodoo at this point in her life, is basically what they're getting at. And so it's showing all these different versions of people that were her ancestors, and it's all well-drawn stuff. But then she's standing here looking like a Jedi, feet faded out into the fog and mist, holding a lightsaber. But it's like Voodoo is one of the most gifted of the gifted ones. So what I gathered from this is that Voodoo was kind of nobody. She was the 18, 19-year-old stripper who got wrapped up into the battle because she's got these alien abilities that she didn't even really understand that she had. And she was never a combatant, really. And so Zealot tried to train her and make her a warrior. But she was still everyone kept trying to take this useless, untrained kid and make her into something, make her into a character that had some value. And I feel like this is James Robinson adding to this. Like, she's going from being nothing to the peak badass of everybody. She's like got these genetic traits, and she's got this destiny, and she's going to be a Jedi, I guess. And so more text just going on and on. It's, you know, I wasn't bored by it or anything, but it does feel a little bit excessive. But if you're only going to have splash pages, I can see the writer going, well, I better fill it up with characterization, otherwise people are going to feel really ripped off, you know. So here's Jedi Voodoo, monstrous version of herself coming up to attack her from behind. So she turns, spins, and zaps it to death, and it vaporizes and dies. I like the shots. Good face shot, great inking, great flowing cape. But again, it's just, even in terms of splash pages, there's almost no background. So it's just figure drawing. So you'd think that Charest should be able to pump these out reasonably quick. And maybe he did. I honestly don't remember the release schedule of this. I don't have a memory that it was delayed a lot. So again, maybe this is how we get the book out in time. With very minimal backgrounds. Now, Charest can do backgrounds. He's just choosing to do a minimalistic style. Like, look at this page with all these little tiny, look at all the dead space. You can look at it and say it's like a design element. And it doesn't bother me. I don't hate it at all. It never stood out to me as bullshit. But you could look at it as, look at all the stuff he did not have to draw on. You just eliminate all that space and then have very, very, very minimalistic backgrounds. You give yourself, you know, room to be fast or faster. So I don't hate it. I like it. When it's artwork that looks this kind of good and dynamic anyway, you could pick it apart and say like they're taking shortcuts and it's kind of bullshit. And I do get it. I do agree on some level, but I still like it, you know. So Grifter, he continues beating up and murdering bad guys, and he finally got some information. He got what he needed to know. Meanwhile, Voodoo, she wakes up. And all the Wildcats like, oh my God, you're back. You did it. And Voodoo's like, Void, she saved me. And Void's like, no, you did it. You saved yourself, and you've never been braver. Oh my God, of course. Meanwhile, Jacob Marlowe, you know, he turns his head, and Warblade's like, hey, we got Grifter. He's on the phone. And so Grifter's like, yeah, I found out the guy. I followed the trail. I killed a bunch of people. The guy we're looking for, he's in Washington, D.C., but there's a Coda base. He's meeting with them. And he's like, Grifter's like, you want me to go kill them? He's like, oh, no, you want me to wait for you guys? Okay, all right, I'll wait for you guys. So Marlowe's like, all right, good job, Grifter, you did good. So then it shows, like, this is a good shot. I love this of Zealot getting her gun ready. Warblade in his stupid outfit looks like he's getting ready. And you got Jacob Marlowe saying, Coda and Hightower. Hightower's like this super powerful bad guy they're going after. They're the ones that they're going after Hightower, but they're surrounded by a bunch of Coda, the warrior women that Zealot is a part of. In fact, she used to be, as I understand it, like the ancient high priestess that trained them all thousands of years ago. But it's this whole sect of super powerfully strong warrior women that are unbeatable. And that's where this Hightower guy is. So Marlowe's like, we've got ourselves quite a fight. So they're leading up to like the next issue. There's going to be a massive battle between the Wildcats and all these other bad guys. So I'm like, oh, all right. Well, I think I'm super interested. Can't wait for that one. And then there's this backup story, Wedding Day Jitters by James Robinson and Terry Dodson, Carl Story, Jason Martin. Terry Dodson is one of those guys way back in the day looking at this stuff. I did not like this artwork, not one bit at all, not one bit. I look at it now, I always thought that Terry Dodson was like a knockoff artist of the Adam Hughes style. And I still think that that's kind of true, but I don't mean it with as much kind of hostility as I would have back in the day if you would have asked me. I feel like the anatomy is all kind of there, but it's all kind of shaped weird. And it has the big wide upper body and the skinny hips that Adam Hughes does. But looking at it, there's really good anatomy going on. And this monkey creature, great shadow shapes, and the inking looks fantastic. The faces are all really well drawn. I look at it now with more understanding. I still don't love it. And Terry Dodson has progressed to become, I think, a more interesting artist to me. And this stuff, it just wasn't good to me. I didn't care for it too much. But I can see how good of an artist he actually was. He can draw all kinds of things that so many of these other, you know, new guys starting with Wildstorm and Top Cow and Extreme, like he was so far advanced in those guys by like a million miles. So I appreciate it more. It's still just not... It's a lot of it's the story. I don't care about the savant character. She's finding this giant monkey and she's hanging onto the side of the... Like, I just don't care about any of this. Like, it's not interesting, really. And I do have this thing where I'm like, I feel like Terry Dodson at this time was really leaning into the vibe that Adam Hughes did, and he's not doing it as good as Adam Hughes. But it's still really good. It's still really talented. So, anyway, a little side story. Don't care. Pinup, this guy, I think his name's Jeff Rubner. I noticed him doing a lot of pinups in these books. If he ever actually drew a sequential story for Wildstorm at any time, I don't ever remember what it was. I don't remember it at all. But I never liked his art. It just never, ever connected with me. I don't think it's very... I don't want to say good, because he can certainly draw, but there's nothing there that captures my attention that sets him above a part of all the other guys that are working for the studios, especially at Wildstorm. So anyway, issue 18, Travis Charest is the draw. He's the star of the show, And I still can't help but just look at this and be like, oh, it's a Jedi. God, also, I shouldn't get into it, but man, how dead is Star Wars these days? Like, Star Wars is beyond dead. It is. I'm sick of Star Wars, and I grew up loving it. I love the original trilogy. The end. I'm sick of lightsabers. Anyway, that's a whole other story. Wildcats, issue 18. Kind of fun. Looking forward to the next one. I think it's Jim Lee back on pencils, if I remember correctly, with Richard Bennett inking, if I remember correctly. So that'll be a fun one to look through. So we'll get to that eventually. Anyway, that's it. Wildcats 18. Thanks for joining me. See you next time.